Hey y'all, it's Raquel Willis, and welcome to Reckoning with Raquel Willis. So, I am an activist, a writer slash author. Check out my memoir, The Risk It Takes to Bloom, and a bunch of things. I also have other podcasts like Afterlives and Queer Chronicles. But I've been wanting a space where I can just be a bit more unfiltered. I feel like, in general, I have to be on and I have to speak in talking points and sound bites, especially when I'm like doing commentary on like ABC News or on CBS or saying a speech to a crowd or whatever you can think of. And I deserve a space to be unfiltered too. And hopefully a space where I'm not going to be hitting my mic every 2 seconds. So if you don't know who I am, you can look me up, raquelwillis.com. You can Google me, baby, or whatever. But this is Reckoning, and we will be using this space, or I will be using this space to unpack culture and politics and just the world and society from my vantage point. I feel like I need to give a little bit more of an intro. I am a Black trans woman from the South, from Augusta, Georgia. And that has really played a role in my life, right? And the lens that I have. I have also been someone who comes from the craft of journalism and storytelling. So I studied journalism at the University of Georgia. And during that time in college, I also was coming into feminism, taking women's studies courses. And that kind of also served as a space for me to understand why I had always had these issues with gender and how it operates in our society and the patriarchy. I've been an activist, a community organizer for over 10 years now. Some of that activism happened as a student at the University of Georgia. But I've worked a lot at the center of Blackness, so with the movement for Black Lives, around feminism, so thinking about these larger kind of feminist movements and what even does that mean in this time? I don't know. I feel like feminist movement isn't kind of congealed really in a way in this era. But I will say reproductive justice movement, even Me Too movement, shout out to people like Tarana Burke and so many others, obviously are real concrete spaces that a lot of that feminism really comes to action. And then, of course, an LGBTQ plus movement. And all that has come along with that. That is where my lens is going to come from. That's how I'm going to be looking at the different topics we have. So I really want to make this a regular thing. We'll see how this first little episode does. It will be uploaded on podcasting platforms, on YouTube. Yeah, so like and subscribe and follow and save and whatever you need to do on whatever platform you're consuming this on. First, I want to say, outside of that disclaimer, happy Black History Month. It is wild that we are halfway through February. It feels like it's been 84 years of BS in terms of politics. A lot has happened in culture, so I know it's been a lot. It's been a very happy Black History Month because for those who are in the Beehive, Beyonce finally won her Album of the Year for Cowboy Carter. The Grammys was a cute little moment. Jalen Hurts, with his fine self, and the Eagles won the Super Bowl. So that was a moment. Of course, Kendrick did his little dance at the Super Bowl and, had some, for a lot of people, deeper political and international implications for the construction of his performance and, of course, how it was perceived. I swear, every time, this is a problem with New York. Every time I record something, If it's not sirens in the background, which I don't know if y'all can hear them, it's planes going over. And I always joke that the surveillance never stops, which is real. It's also snowing right now. Like, New York is just doing too much for me. So I want to start by just giving like my dispatch on what it's been like as a Black trans woman dealing with this Trump era as it has emerged. It's been wild. I also was asked this. I was at a retreat last week and I was asked to give kind of a dispatch from community around what is happening to trans folks to this larger audience, mostly of like cis folks. And I had like 3 to 5 minutes and I was like, I gotta whittle all of this down to like 3 to 5 minutes. That's wild. But I'm gonna do my best here. And of course, in future episodes, I will go into a deeper vibe. But I wanna name that I know that this is a heavy time for a lot of people, that we're seeing kind of the chaos, the kind of flood the zone of stories and actions from the Trump administration. Shout out to Ezra Klein and folks who've been sounding the alarm on this kind of flood the zone approach, right? Where it's kind of like the Trump administration is throwing as much chaos at us to have us looking in every which way, so that we're disoriented and that we kind of burn out and accept the BS that they are trying to throw at us in every direction. But I also bristle at the fact that it's often a lot of white people, it's often a lot of like cishet men who will say the chaos is there and kind of insinuate that we shouldn't pay attention to it, right? Almost like when they talk about these attacks on the trans community as culture war stuff, right? And they belittle the impact that it has on the actual lives of trans people, or the lives of people of color, Black folks, and the lives of women, right? You can't just say, for instance, that these executive orders targeting the trans community are just a culture war thing that we shouldn't pay attention to because we need to pay attention to class or economics. Like, I hate that frame. I think it ignores that actually folks on the margins, particularly around race and gender, don't have a choice but to focus on all of these things, right? Like, it's cute that you can decide when to tap in and tap out, but like, we don't have that luxury. And I think as a trans person right now, it's particularly hard because unfortunately, we learned from the 2024 election, and I shouldn't say learned because a lot of us already knew this, but we don't really have the numbers on our side socially and culturally. I think in general, people tend to have a live and let live perspective when it comes to communities that they're not a part of. But I think when it comes to the trans community, the right has done such a disgustingly good job at stoking the ignorance of the cisgender public over the last several years. And so they fed into these narratives of trans people as predatory, whether we're talking about the bathroom debate or talking about inclusion in sports, or as liars and deceivers, which has always been a part of kind of the discourse around our lives. I mean, thinking about things like the trans panic defense, right? When we hear about usually cishet men who engage a situation with a trans woman and then are violent to us or may murder or kill us, and then say, oh, well, I was tricked and I was deceived, as if even if that were possible and a thing, that was justification for our death, right? So the right has done a great job of making the general public focus on really minute aspects often of our lives, or that impact minor I don't want to say minor issues, right? Because these are big issues to the people who are in the center of it, right? So, like, for athletes who are trans sports is a big thing, right? It does impact their ability to pursue their passions. Or when we're thinking about trans youth who need access to healthcare, yes, there may be smaller numbers than the right is saying, but it still obviously impacts a very real group. And I don't like the way that people sideline with this kind of label of culture war issues, or say that these aren't kitchen table issues, or say that these groups are so small that we shouldn't even be talking about or thinking about them. I think that that is also dangerous too. Now, with these executive orders, one of the big ones, kind of fresh out of the gate, is this one that says it's about defining male and female, right? Based on reproductive cells. And that impacts all of us because, and I said this when I was giving that little debrief to that group, but like, I need cisgender people to understand that you will never be man enough or woman enough. So you might as well be free, and you might as well help build a world where everyone can be free. And I think a lot of these discussions around how annoyed people are with having to think about pronouns, or them not wanting to discuss trans people anymore because we've shoved it down their throats, feeds this idea that it's uncomfortable, right? Like, it's uncomfortable for a lot of cis people to have to think about the fact that actually maybe these identities are not as fixed. And maybe you are a bit more gender nonconforming than you realized. And I contend that everyone is some kind of gender nonconforming, because these ideals around masculinity and femininity and maleness and femaleness and manhood and womanhood are just that. They're ideals. So there's no perfect score that you can actually accrue around these categories. And we cut people down, not just trans people or non-binary people or gender nonconforming people or intersex people, but we cut each other down if we don't think people are living up to the norms of the box that they're supposed to be a part of. And these boxes are boxes that are given to us when we are born, even before we're born, right? I shudder every time somebody is going on and on about their baby boy or their baby girl that is not born yet. Because I know that identity is so much more complex, and you're already putting certain expectations on this child that is not even in the world yet. And I think we need to move away from that. Anyway, going back to this executive order around maleness and femaleness, I want to read it. So let me actually like pull this mess up. So the title is Defending Womanhood from Gender Ideology Extremism and Restoring Biological Truth to the Federal Government. Stunt Queen. If you don't know anything else, Donald Trump and the Elon Musk of the world are stunt queens. Also, this is something that Ezra Klein has talked about, this kind of attention economy. Like, they know how to grab attention. Tressie McMillan Cottom also wrote about this as well. And I want to shout them out. I mean, they're a part of the New York Times, which it's a whole nother story. The New York Times has been a part of pushing some of the most dangerous narratives about trans people. But when I call them these particular writers out, I'm understanding that they are individuals that are a part of an institution that has been a part of making things worse for trans people over the last several years. And I will probably talk about that at length in a future episode. Can't get into it right now. But this executive order already tells you, right? It's feeding into this J.K. Rowling fake ass rhetoric that trans women in particular are trying to steal women's places in society. And oh, we're not who we say we are, and we're dangerous, right? Or that we're predators in waiting, which is not true. And trans people are overwhelmingly victims of violence and discrimination, not the perpetrators of it. But also this idea of biological truth. We already know, if nothing else, Trump doesn't give a about the truth, right? Which is why there is this attack on media outlets that he has pushed for pretty much a decade, right? All of the discussion of fake news in service of elevating disgusting and dangerous outlets like Fox News and Breitbart and on and on. He doesn't believe in truth, and he doesn't care about defending women's safety. You want to tell me this man who has been found liable for sexual assault cares about defending women and their safety? You want to tell me that this man who has made the criteria for his cabinet, instead of DEI, right, where they talk about diversity, equity, and inclusion as a problem, essentially saying if you are of color, if you are Black, if you are a woman, if you are queer or trans, or anything other than like a white cishet man, you're automatically not qualified for the role that you're in, but instead has made the criteria of his government people who have a track record of bigotry and lying, and also having allegations of sexual assault. Whether we're talking about Matt Gaetz or we're talking about a Pete Hegseth or whoever else. Like, why would you buy that he actually cares about your safety as a woman or any marginalized group? That part is ridiculous to me. Anyway, so he pushes this idea that anyone who is trans or understands the humanity, dignity, and respect that trans people deserve, that we're ideologues. And then he pushes this idea that we have this agenda that's focused on men entering women's spaces. Because I guess that's what he does, right? Like, that's manhood to him, is that men can't be trusted, first of all. And at all times, women need to be vigilant. I think that tells a lot more about him and what he knows about men than actually what he knows about the experiences, particularly of trans women. But he pushes this idea that we're trying to eradicate the biological reality of sex. And that is just simply not true. What is true is that we have to acknowledge that, first of all, sex is not binary. You know, we can talk about being male or female in so many different ways, right? And I think the goalpost shifts when people want to denounce trans people's existence, right? They'll say, oh, well, it's about chromosomes. Oh, well, okay, well, people can have different chromosomes. Well, it's about genitalia. Oh, well, if it's can't be about genitalia, then it must be about X, Y, and Z other thing. And most trans people that I know will tell you they were assigned male or female at birth. That's not something that anybody is hiding. But we also know that your biology doesn't always determine your destiny. And particularly your biology at birth. Because what does it mean if you have a particular medical transition where you don't have your original equipment, so to speak? You do have bottom surgery or different secondary sexual characteristics. What is the point of trying to define people solely by the body that they had at one point in their life that they no longer have? It's unnecessary. It's also none of your business. And honey, when I go into the restroom, I'm not worried about what Miss Thing has in her pants or her history. I'm just trying to get in and get out. And that's been the case since the start of my gender transition. Even when I wasn't always assumed to be cisgender, nobody was in my business like that. And I know that is a privilege that I have had. I know that that's not always true, that there are trans folks who people read as trans and so may deal with ire, more looks, and consideration. But there are also cis people who are seen as more gender nonconforming, who experience this kind of discrimination and policing. And so we need to be creating more understanding around the complexity of people's experiences, not less. I think also constantly intersex people are just kind of thrown to the side. And you can't just be like, oh, well, most people have a binary sex. Intersex people are so rare. Let me look up how many people are intersex. Okay, so this stat comes from, and this is just the first one on Google, so I didn't do like a deep kind of dive. But I just want to say that this stat from OHCHR, the Office of High Commissioner of Human Rights. So this is the United Nations, right? So we're dealing with a global rate. It says experts estimate that up to 1.7% of the population are born with intersex traits. And you want to know what the estimated percentage of transgender people is, particularly in the United States? So according to Pew, 1.6% of the population in the United States, according to a 2022 Research Center study, identifies as trans or non-binary. 1.6. And I'm going to shout out the Williams Institute because they actually have been chronicling the rates of trans people. They say 1.6 million people identify as trans. We're around 1% plus of folks are intersexed. And then about 1% plus are transgender / non-binary. You can't say the intersex folks are so small of a category that we shouldn't be thinking about sex as less than binary. They still exist. And they still count and they still matter. And then similarly with trans folks, often trans folks acknowledge that they were assigned male or female at birth, but move through the world as something different than what you would assume would be attached to the sex they were assigned at birth. And also, let's be clear, most people don't know that they're intersex. Most people don't have their chromosomes tested. A lot of intersex people don't even know that they're intersex for large chunks of their lives. So I think we just have to be real about it and embrace the complexity of people's experiences and be willing to be wrong. As Kendrick might say, be humble, have some humility about the fact that just because you don't know a trans person in your everyday life doesn't mean that we don't exist and doesn't mean that we don't deserve rights and protections. Same thing for intersex folks. And I also want to add, obviously there can be overlap of folks who are intersex and folks who are transgender or non-binary. So going back to this executive order, so this definition they're using of female meaning a person belonging at conception to the sex that produces the large reproductive cell. People have called that out and said actually everyone is female at conception. But see, this is how they put in their plan for this future abortion ban. let's be clear. That's talking about at conception, honey. That's some abortion ban language, that national abortion ban they trying to push through in the future. But I also want to name that I also saw like some TERFs, trans exclusionary radical feminists. I really want to call them trans exclusionary radical fuck girls, but that might be too much. Because I just hate conceding feminism to them at all, because it's not, especially because some of them were applauding this executive order, and I'm like, girl, we have largely moved away from defining women by reproductive capabilities or possibilities, because it ignores that, like, that's not everyone's destiny to reproduce, cis or trans or non-binary or intersex. There are plenty of cis women who can't reproduce. That doesn't mean that they're less of a woman. Same thing for men. There are plenty of cis men who can't reproduce. That doesn't make them less of a man. And there are men and women who are cis who don't have certain body parts, right? You might have a hysterectomy. You might have had, well, this isn't lacking a body part, but if you get a vasectomy, right, and you can't produce, the sperm, that doesn't make you less of a man or a woman. You could get in an accident and lose your thing. That doesn't make you less of a man. And so I hate this kind of double standard that is put on trans people. We need people to understand that it's not actually just about trans folks. And this is why I think trans visibility as a frame has not done what it's needed to do. I think people have resented and particularly cis people have resented in general the visibility of trans people because it has made them uncomfortable. And there hasn't, unfortunately, been enough political education. And I know that there are talks of dismantling the Department of Education by the Trump administration, which is bad. But I also want to name that we have always had a piss poor educational system. Like, overwhelmingly, people, and I grew up in the South, right? People weren't learning about the complexities of our bodies or true biology. You weren't learning that there were intersex people or that trans people existed or that queer people existed, much less learning about contraception in some places, right? Which is why there are high rates of teenage pregnancy and HIV and STI rates, particularly in the South, right? There's often an overlap between the lack of comprehensive sex education and people being really equipped to plan their lives and live out their lives in maybe the ways that they would want, right? Instead of being kind of at the whim of whatever kind of happens, because it's by design. But cis people need to understand that these restrictive boxes impact you too. And I've been saying this for years, but the fight for trans people and gender nonconforming people and non-binary people to be our fullest selves is connected to the struggles that cis men and boys have, right? It's not okay that we have a society that tells men and boys that they can't have a full range of emotion, a full human experience, that crying is a betrayal to your gender, that having certain interests, liking certain colors is a betrayal to your gender, that being gay, liking another boy or man is a betrayal to your gender. That is a gender problem. It's on the spectrum of the issues that trans folks face. And then similarly, for women and girls, these reductive ideas of what they're capable of achieving in life and I'm talking about cis women and girls, but also this idea that they can't be the drivers of their own destinies without being attached at the hip to some grody man on the street, some random dude. You know, that is a gender problem. And then, trans and non-binary folks are facing a mixture of a lot of these different norms and restrictions that just don't fit us. And I want cis people to understand that you're actually not going to win in a patriarchal system that thinks so little of who you are and what you can be. So I actually did not want to spend this whole first episode talking about what I'm often always talking about, which is the plight of trans people in our society. But maybe it's a good opener, and then for the next few, I can branch out more, because that's kind of what I want to do, is be able to talk about other things without kind of being pigeonholed into this trans space. But this is a good kind of primer for you from my lens. So I'll keep talking about the executive orders impacting trans folks just briefly. We've had an executive order targeting young people ages 19 and under accessing gender affirming care. There are a lot of people who don't understand that gender affirming care can range from a lot of things. It could be access to mental health care and therapy. It could be access to puberty blockers. It could be access to surgery, though that is rare. But these are also decisions that we should not have the government trying to intervene in. And it's so funny that Republicans don't mind the government intervening when it comes to queer and trans people's lives. But parents and guardians and their youth and their medical professionals got that on lock. Everyone else needs to butt out of experiences that they have no range to understand and will not encounter again, because we're talking about a smaller percentage of the population. And that also calls out the lie that this is some massive trend. We know that Trump is lying, saying your kid could go off to school and I guess get gender affirmation surgery or something in the gym, and then you pick them up and they're a different gender. Like, it doesn't work like that. Clearly, it's nonsensical. I think people lose all brain cells when it comes to talking about trans folks. Like, seriously. Same thing with there's also been these other kind of implications from these executive orders. Passports, right? They're really cracking down and not allowing people to change their gender on passports. There's been stories of people's gender markers not being changed and them being sent one with the wrong gender marker on it, or being denied the change. Like, that's a problem. I think we also need to be connecting this idea of document insecurity that trans folks are facing right now, particularly with passports, and maybe around Social Security gender marker changes, to how our undocumented family is being treated, right? I think this idea of making it difficult for folks to participate in U.S. society and navigate it with safety and security is something that we can come together on, because no one should be facing this document insecurity. Not to mention, there are reports that cis people who have had name changes or had an incorrect gender on their documents will potentially have issues too, right? So again, it implicates all of our experiences. But overall, it's really been difficult in this first month of the Trump administration, seeing these kind of siloed analyses on these executive orders. I need folks to understand that the attacks on the trans community impact communities of color too, impact migrants too, because there are trans migrants, there are Black trans people, hello, and other trans people of color. I think people need to understand that the DEI issue, issues around competence. We could look at the military and the blocks on trans people continuing to serve. I have a lot of thoughts about the military too. That is also for a future episode. But that's an issue when you're saying that trans people are unfit because we don't live honorable lives. And we already know Hegseth doesn't believe that women should be in the military, particularly in combat roles. So don't be surprised when cis women are attacked as well for their roles in the military. But also, cis women, largely white cis women, have been the greatest beneficiaries of DEI policies, right? Because we know how white supremacy works on every level in our society. And I think also thinking about the deportations, they are stopping all types of people, impacting their lives. We ignore Black migrants. This has been my ramble on what it's been like to be a Black trans woman in this first month of the Trump administration. Future episodes, we will talk about all types of things. But I think this is a good primer for my lens. Thank you for listening. Stay tuned. Wherever you can, leave me comments. Let me know what you would want to see from this space. Reckoning with Raquel Willis. Like and subscribe and all of that stuff. And stay tuned. I'm going to try to do these more regularly. My dream would be weekly, but a girl will be busy. Anyway, thank you for listening. And if you want to support me in this, because this is self-produced, you can tap into my Substack or my Patreon. Yeah. And throw a little coin your girl way. Anyway, y'all take care and let's keep reckoning. Bye.